good morning, bon dia, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. My name is Shikako Masaki from the Sasakawa Health Foundation. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. This is the second in our series entitled Leprosy and Hansen disease as human rights issues. Hansen disease, leprosy, is not only a medical problem, but also a social problem with stigma and discrimination. Today, we will focus on the human rights issue of the Hansen disease. We hope that this webinar will be an opportunity to reflect on the importance of these issues. Before we begin this seminar, we would like to inform of you two things. First, there will be an interpretation in English, French, Hindi, and Bahasa, Indonesia, and Portuguese. If you need an interpreter, please click on the interpretation box at the bottom of your screen and choose the language you prefer. Secondly, there will be a Q&A session today. If you have any questions, please select the Q&A option at the bottom of the screen and send us your questions. I kindly request you to send your question in English so that our secretariat can easily understand them. So let us begin the seminar. I now would like to welcome our special guest, Dr. Alice Cruz, the UN Special Rapporteur on the elimination of discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their family members, to provide her message. Unfortunately, Dr. Alice cannot present here on live today, so we got a video message from her.
In 1958, Eleanor Roosevelt addressed the nations of the world with a speech called "Where do Human Rights Begin?" and I quote, "Where, after all, do universal human rights begin? In small places close to home, so close and so small that they cannot be seen on any map of the world. Yet they are the world of the individual person, the neighborhood he lives in, the school or college he attends, the factory, farm or office where he works. Such are the places where every man, woman and child seeks equal justice, equal opportunity, equal dignity without discrimination. Unless these rights have meaning there, they have little meaning anywhere. Without concerted citizen action to uphold them close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world." Eleanor Roosevelt was making a very important point. Although indispensable, it is not sufficient to have human rights written down in law, whether they are written down in international treaties, conventions, and other human rights instruments, constitutions, or national laws. Human rights must be embodied in people's lives, and they must be experienced on equal terms by all human beings without any distinction. Most national constitutions recognize the core principles of equality, dignity, and non-discrimination. But are these core principles of human rights experienced in the actual lives of all individuals? Unfortunately, the answer is no. Let us move now from 1958 to 2020. A brilliant woman and a very active leader of one organization of persons affected by leprosy shared the following testimony with me while I was preparing my report to the Human Rights Council titled "Disproportionate Impact of the COVID-19 Pandemic on Persons Affected by Leprosy and Their Family Members," and I quote, "As a woman with a disability, I am more disadvantaged. The society outcasts me. Even if I am allowed to live within the household, I am like that. Not getting involved and no opinions are asked of me. I got the disease in childhood. I was denied education. It was like a predestination because of the disease. I became dependent on my family, providing support within the household. But the household activities can be quite challenging. Things like fetching water can be very difficult because of my disability. I have been hiding inside the house, but men within the household take advantage of me. They intimidate me, and they also sexually abuse me. They think that people like me must accept that. Other members of our organization say that once they got the disease, their husbands blamed them and started beating them. This testimony, which is only one of too many similar to it, clearly shows that the promise of universality of human rights as provided for in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights has hardly been fulfilled for persons affected by leprosy. Persons affected by leprosy face multiple discrimination, meaning they are often discriminated against on various grounds, like leprosy, of course, but also gender, age, poverty, disability, sexuality, race. They also struggle with violence from the state and society and with interpersonal violence. Importantly, this woman whose testimony I quoted lives in a country that keeps in place laws that directly discriminate against people on the grounds of leprosy. But her life has also been shaped by substantive discrimination, that is, denial of opportunities on equal terms with other people. She could not study because of leprosy, and therefore she could not be autonomous and live independently, and became vulnerable to household abuses and violence. Let us think again on the question made by Eleanor Roosevelt, where do human rights begin? But let us now make it on a slightly different manner. Who has the obligation to guarantee the enjoyment of human rights to all people without discrimination? The state. And why? Because states were, in fact, the main perpetrators of human rights violations throughout history, using their power and force in violent manners, such as they have done with persons affected by leprosy, confining and segregating them and denying them citizen rights. That is why the states have a negative obligation, meaning they are required to refrain from acting in such a way that violates human rights. But they also have positive obligations, meaning they are bounded to take the necessary steps to actively protect against human rights violations. Omission and negligence, as it is so many times the case with leprosy, is in fact and in my view a violation of the state's positive obligations to protect, promote and fulfill the human rights of persons affected by leprosy. In fact, in most countries, states have failed both their negative and positive obligations towards persons affected by leprosy. But again, thinking on Eleanor Roosevelt, is this enough? And more importantly, is this enough in the face of the total disruption of societies, weakening of multilateralism, and barriers faced by monitoring mechanisms that have been brought on by the pandemic? It is not. Also here, Eleanor Roosevelt gives us an important key to this paradox. We look for the state to enforce rights while we know that is hardly sufficient. When she says that without concerted citizen action to uphold human rights close to home, we shall look in vain for progress in the larger world. As citizens, we have the power to demand the passage of law in books into law in practice. But we need to believe in our own power to change narratives and systems. You don't need to be a lawyer, you don't need to be a celebrity, you don't need to have institutional power. What we need is to empower ourselves by joining hands and efforts with others who want to see human rights embodied in the lives of all individuals. Empowerment is a collective process, and so is systemic change. It is through organized collective action that we can bring the change we want to see in the world. In this, I have learned at Morhan, the Brazilian social movement of persons affected by leprosy, in the words of Alice Tibiriçá, with the state if it must, without the state if possible, and against the state if necessary. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Alice. Your message reminded us how important it is that we continue work together to ensure that human rights of the people affected by Hansen disease are respected. Next, I would like to invite Mr. Faustino, Vice National Coordinator of Morhan, Brazil, to make his address on behalf of our partner organizations. Morhan is an organization of persons affected by leprosy in Brazil and has been tackling it with various issues of Hansen disease for a long time.
Hello everyone. Firstly, as a person affected by Hansen disease, I would like to thank Mr. Sasakawa for the brilliant idea of remind people that despite the COVID-19 pandemic being devastating and responsible for thousands of deaths worldwide, we still exist, we resist and need care. Especially, we need to be seen as human beings who need attention and care. I would also like to thank Mr. Takahiro for his kind invitation and confidence in representing at this event the thousands of voices affected by Hansen disease worldwide. I know that it's been many years and incredible enough. We are still asking people not to forget. There were moments in my life's history where I thought, now yes, we are not invisible any longer. But I also realized that there were men talking about us without us. Our voice had no weight or value in those moments. They were just voices echoing in the wind. People looked at us and even cared about our lament, but they wouldn't hear us. Sometimes they spoke so truthfully and so properly about our lives and our stories that they sounded more knowledgeable about us than our own selves. It's like they had the solution for our problems at the tip of a pen, in the sound of their voices, while we didn't even know what the problems were, since we were told to just accept what we were told. Take the medicine, keep the appointments, open your mouth to check if you did take the medicine. Do not abandon the treatment. We would stare at the health professionals' faces with such a fear that it made us freeze. The distance imposed by those who assisted us was abyss-like. Then they started talking about prejudice, discrimination, and stigma. One more time, I thought to myself, now they are indeed worried about us, but time and again I made the big mistake of believing and renewing the hopes of those who couldn't listen to us. Every single day, thousands of people affected by Hansen disease knock on the public health system's doors, hoping to be heard, but all they get is phrases, solutions taken from books, and I promise that one day life will be better off. I'm not saying that there isn't such a thing as a people that care about Hansen's disease with love. I'm not saying that we haven't made progress in dealing with Hansen disease, but if you look at it as a whole, we still remain in the bubble of those who say we will have better days. When we look at the overall pictures, we are invisible beings in the society we live in. Then there came the new coronavirus pandemic, which brought a mysterious disease, infecting and killing people tremendously fast. Each day, both the news and social bombarded us with fear. Every infected friend felt like COVID-19 had knocked on our doors, just waiting for us to open it. It was frightening. In Brazil, several health professionals withdrew from public health services, many of them because they were in risk groups, either due to comorbidities or advanced age, that caused decreased assistance to people affected by Hansen disease, causing worsening of clinical conditions, sequels, amputations, and even death. I mentioned 14-year-old José Gabriel. Due to prolonged use of corticosteroids without medical follow-up, he was hospitalized, had both legs amputated, multiple organ failure, and died within the hospital. Days after turning 14 on a hospital bed. It was the biggest case of government negligence and omission I have ever seen in my life. A crime that victimized a child. Another case that shocked me was that of Miss Cicera Alves, living across the street from the health center. She changed her own dressings because no one in the health center would help her. She was diagnosed with cancer, but the health service did not provide the exam to confirm the diagnosis. She cried and suffered every day for not being sure of what was happening to her foot. A large singed wound that had already spread almost over her entire foot, leaving only half of it for her to lean on. We at Morhan had social media campaign and got to the financial resource for her to do the test, which she did, and the of cancer diagnosis has been discarded. But she still lives in the community making her own dressings, without an assistance from the health center and waiting on a surgery for more than 8 months. Those two examples are just two amidst many absurdities that of people affected by Hansen's disease or victims of in Brazil. We also went through the biggest Hansen's disease medicine shortage of our time. Some people had to start treatment over. I heard accounts from people saying that when they got a medical appointment during the chaos, they couldn't go in because they didn't have the financial resource to commit. Some complementary treatments were no longer performed for the same reason. The patient had no money to buy medication and had to make a difficult choice to either eat or buy medication. During Sasakawa Health Foundation's emergency project, we had mixed feelings about people affected by Hansen's disease. On the one side was the joy of being given food and a hygiene kit. On the other was the sadness for not having proper attention and treatment in the basic health network. They forgot Hansen's disease. They forgot about us. We are nearly imperceptible to the eyes, and now we have turned into invisible beings, forgotten by the system. In general, we never were a priority, and even less so with the COVID-19 pandemic. We believe that this lament, this cry for help embedded in this campaign, will touch the world's heart and soul. This campaign, promoted by the Sasakawa Foundation, fully supported by Morhan, the Reintegration movement of people affected by Hansen's disease, is what we need. Once again, I thank Mr. Yohei Sasakawa, United Nations Goodwill Ambassador for Hansen's disease, the Sasakawa Health Foundation for hours talking about us and including us in the debate, respecting us, including and truly listening to us and giving us voice. Hopefully, this worldwide campaign will raise people's awareness of our call for help. I want to scream, and I will scream as loud as I can. Don't forget Hansen's disease. Don't forget about us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Faustino. Don't forget, Hansen disease is a real voice of every single person affected by Hansen disease and their families and friends. Your message has made us even more determined to bring this voice to as many people as possible around the world. Thank you again. Next, I would like to share with you the WHO Goodwill Ambassador 20th anniversary video titled Leprosy and Human Rights.
There is a long history of people with leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, being excluded from society based on fear and misunderstanding. Such discriminatory attitudes persist to this today. In 2003, WHO Goodwill Ambassador for Leprosy Elimination, Yohei Sasakawa, approached the UN Commission on Human Rights, replaced in 2006 by the Human Rights Council, saying that the discrimination experienced by people affected by leprosy was a serious violation of their human rights. Sasakawa says, people who should be part of society remain isolated in colonies facing hardships. The more you look into it, the more you see the restrictions they live under, including legal restrictions in some cases. Isn't it strange that someone cured of a disease can't take their place in society?
これはやっぱりこの人権問題としての解決をきちっと図らないと、本当の意味のハンセン病を制圧したということにならないということに遅まきながら気がついてね、2003年から国連人権理事会で活動するようになったわけです。
In 2007, the Japanese government appointed Sasakawa as its Goodwill Ambassador for the human rights of persons affected by leprosy. Collaboration with the Japanese government led in December 2010 to a UN General Assembly resolution on elimination of discrimination against persons affected by leprosy and their family members to call on states to full consideration of principles and guidelines. The resolution was adopted unanimously by 192 countries. Following the resolution, the Nippon Foundation organized a series of symposiums on leprosy and human rights in Brazil, India, Ethiopia, Morocco, and Switzerland between 2012 and 2015 to promote the principles and guidelines. Ongoing cooperation with the Japanese government led to the appointment of a UN Special Rapporteur on Leprosy by the Human Rights Council in 2017. In 2020, her term was extended for a further 3 years. Although 11 years have passed since the UN General Assembly resolution, there are still discriminatory laws, and discrimination persists in daily life.
ハンセン病の患者、回復者、その家族に対しての差別は絶対いけないと。そのためにプリンシプルとガイドラインというのが決められましたが、これは強制力は別にあるわけでもありませんし、今言った障害者の権利条約だとか、子どもの権利条約ですとか、タバコの枠組み条約ですとか、条約として、国の機関が批准していてもなかなか実行されてないんで、そういう中でこのハンセン病のこの決議とプリンシプルとガイドラインっていうのはこういうものがあるんですよということを私たち関係者、そして回復者が行政や政府に働きかけて、そして欠点を直してもらうツールとして、道具として使うことに大変意味があるわけなんです。
The principles assert that persons affected by leprosy and their family members are entitled to all the human rights and fundamental freedoms proclaimed in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and other relevant international human rights instruments, such as the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. The guidelines describe how states should promote, protect, and ensure the full realization of these human rights and fundamental freedoms without discrimination on the grounds of leprosy. 1. Promote, protect, and ensure the full realization of all human rights and fundamental freedoms for all persons affected by leprosy and their family members. 2. Recognize that all persons are equal before the law and entitled to equal protection of the law. 3. Pay special attention to the promotion and protection of the human rights of women, children, and members of other vulnerable groups. 4. Support the reunification of families separated in the past as a result of policies and practices relating to persons diagnosed with leprosy. 5. Promote enjoyment of rights, including choice of place of residence, allowing full inclusion and participation in the community. 6. Ensure rights related to participation in political life. 7. Encourage and support employment. 8. Promote equal access to education. 9. Remove discriminatory language from governmental publications. 10. Promote equal access to public places, public transport, cultural and recreational facilities, and places of worship. 11. Provide free or affordable health care that includes early detection, prompt treatment, counseling, and access to free medication. 12. Recognize the right of an adequate standard of living and provide assistance to persons living in poverty. 13. Raise awareness and foster respect for human rights and dignity. 14. Create a committee of stakeholders to develop, implement, and follow up on activities relating to human rights. Many organizations of persons affected by leprosy have been formed around the world to fight their dignity and rights. Sasakawa Health Foundation and the Nippon Foundation have been supporting such organizations since the middle of the 1990s. Recognizing that persons affected by leprosy have a key role to play in resolving issues related to the disease, the Goodwill Ambassador encourages them to attend meetings with government officials, take part in international conferences, and make their voices heard. In 2011, the WHO issued guidelines on strengthening the participation of persons affected by leprosy in leprosy services, in such areas as case finding, counseling, and awareness raising, as a way to improve the quality of leprosy services.
今、世界各地で回復者の皆さんが立ち上がって、我々がハンセン病を治すこともそうだし、経験者としてこういう差別撤廃のためには自分たちが声を出さなきゃダメだということに気づき始めて活動が活発化してきたということで、この問題の解決が大きく前進することが可能になってきたと私は思ってますので、これからは病気を治すことじゃなくて、治った回復者の皆さんに大いに社会で声を上げて活動をしていただきたいと思っています。ハンセン病の回復者も含めて世界には12億人の障害者がいらっしゃいます。で、この障害者の皆さん方がやはり結婚もできる、学校も行ける、そして働くこともできるという、そういう障害を含めた人のインクルージョンのそういう社会に変わっていかなければいけない。彼らには働く情熱も意欲もありながら、ないのはチャンスだけですから、そういうダイバーシティの時代がアフターコロナの時代にしなきゃいけないし、そのためにはインクルージョンな社会にしていく必要がある。彼らには大きな能力や可能性も秘めているわけですから、こういう人たちが社会参画をしていただくことが素晴らしい未来の世界を作ると思うので、ハンセン病の回復者の皆さん方はもっと自信を持って社会に対して活発に発言をしていただく、 ことが重要だし、そのための組織づくりに笹川保健財団も日本財団もこれから力を合わせて、彼らが生き生きとして、政府にも行政にもあらゆるところで胸を張って、意見表明ができる、あるいは活動できる場を作って社会の一員として、評価を受ける、そういう社会を作りたいと思って皆さんとこれからアフターコロナさらに努力をしていく必要があると考えています。
Thank you. So let's move on to the next part, talking session. I would like to welcome Miss Julia, Miss Universe Brazil, Miss Carolina, Miss World Brazil, and Mr. Sasakawa, WHO Goodwill Ambassador for Leprosy Elimination. Both misses are very passionate about the issue of the Hansen disease. With this campaign, they are spreading the message, don't forget Hansen disease, throughout Brazil. Mr. Altu, National Coordinator of Morhan, will be our facilitator of this session. Altu, floor is yours.
Obrigado, Chicago. É muito bom estar aqui com vocês. Agradecer a Sasakawa a oportunidade de estar com vocês na luta mundial contra a Hanseníase e estar com todos aqui do mundo todo, os companheiros de movimentos de Hanseníase de todo o mundo, né? Boa tarde, boa noite, bom dia para todos nós. Isso é uma sessão de trabalho, é uma sessão para que a gente possa impulsionar essa campanha no mundo todo, né? Prezado doutor Sasakawa, prezada Miss Caroline, prezada Miss Julia, é muito bom, né, trabalhar com vocês intensamente na luta contra a Hanseníase aqui no Brasil. Eu tenho aprendido muito com vocês e aí eu queria já iniciar o nosso debate, né, falando para vocês um pouquinho que nessa luta que a gente tem por um mundo com menos injustiça, por um mundo sem a doença de Hanseníase, aqui no Brasil a gente passa por um grave problema, uma grave crise social, né, e econômica e ética, né? E com a Covid-19, muitas doenças foram esquecidas, mas parece que as pessoas atingidas pela doença de Hansen, assim como o Faustino falou, elas têm uma invisibilidade muito maior, né? Em 2020, comparado a 2019, se estima que a gente tenha deixado de diagnosticar quase 55% de casos novos da doença, né? Dados preliminares de 2021 apontam um baixo diagnóstico, mas também mostram para a gente que estão chegando pessoas com formas mais avançadas da Hanseníase. Estão chegando pessoas com sequelas da doença, bem como uma baixa cobertura dos exames de contato. Ainda temos muitos relatos de preconceito, né, e estigma. Isso não é um problema só do Brasil, né? O relatório apresentado pela relatora especial da ONU, Alice Cruz, aponta isso também. Então, eu gostaria de saber, na opinião de vocês três, que estão aqui conosco no debate, o que a gente pode fazer para diminuir esses agravos provocados pela pandemia? O que a gente pode fazer para enfrentar esse esquecimento da Hanseníase? Eu gostaria, então, de iniciar com a palavra da Júlia Gama. Júlia, com você.
Olá a todos, um grande prazer estar aqui com todos vocês. Eu sou Júlia Gama, sou voluntária do Morhan já há 7 anos e foi quando me tornei Miss Mundo Brasil que tive contato com a causa da Hanseníase e desde então venho trabalhando com a causa nacional e internacionalmente. Quero começar agradecendo todo o trabalho que o Morhan faz em prol da luta contra a Hanseníase no Brasil. Graças a ele, a gente tem essa atenção à causa no Brasil e estendo também a minha gratidão à Sasakawa, que viabiliza muitas das nossas ações aqui no Brasil, muitas das ações que eu pude participar foi graças ao apoio internacional da Sasakawa aqui no Brasil. Então, muito obrigada. A minha experiência é de alguém que nunca teve hanseníase. E a verdade é que eu desconhecia essa causa até ter contato com ela em 2014 como Miss Mundo Brasil. E a primeira coisa que eu posso dizer que a gente tem a nosso favor para lutar contra a hanseníase, e é algo que eu pude observar no Brasil e fora do Brasil, é que a comunidade que lida com a causa de pacientes, ex-pacientes e voluntários é uma comunidade muito amorosa. Eu entendo que é uma doença que tem um histórico muito forte, muito sofrimento envolvido, e isso fez as pessoas envolvidas nessa causa muito humanas. Então, eu, como voluntária, tenho que dizer que foi esse acolhimento da comunidade que luta contra a hanseníase que fez eu me apaixonar pela causa, que fez eu ficar, que fez eu me interessar e me importar e querer contribuir com a causa. Isso eu acho que é um fator muito importante, essa humanidade que nós temos no nosso grupo. E isso a gente tem que perpetuar, mesmo com tanta dificuldade que a gente enfrenta cada dia mais. A doença de Hansen, ela é uma doença, como eu já disse, com um histórico muito forte. E quando a gente fala de erradicação da hanseníase, a gente está falando de direitos humanos, a gente está falando de saúde básica, família, amor e empatia. São assuntos universais. Então, eu entendo que o que nos afasta ainda de conseguir conectar com o resto da população é realmente disseminar informação, porque eu, por experiência, posso dizer que todas as pessoas a quem eu pude levar a mensagem da erradicação da hanseníase ou trazer o conhecimento, a informação de que hanseníase tem cura, de que no Brasil ainda existe hanseníase, que infelizmente é o que muita gente nem sabe, essas pessoas se comoveram com a causa, essas pessoas passaram a se importar e a disseminar a causa também. Então, eu diria que para a gente poder erradicar a hanseníase, é essencial o foco na disseminação de informação. E falando em informação, eu vejo que seja muito importante a gente focar na informação de base de crianças, principalmente em escolas. Eu acredito que elas têm um papel muito importante na sociedade, elas conseguem levar essa informação para casa. Eu entendo que as crianças têm o papel de educar as famílias. Elas têm esse poder porque a gente está falando de famílias de baixa estrutura, de muita vulnerabilidade. Então, famílias que talvez não tiveram acesso ao estudo, mas essas crianças que estão tendo acesso na escola, elas podem levar essa informação para casa e nos ajudar muito. Paralelamente a isso, também fazer vínculos com líderes comunitários que já tenham a confiança do seu grupo de convívio, que possam permitir a entrada do Morhan, permitir a entrada das organizações que tratam dessa causa, para trazer essa informação, para trazer esse fim do preconceito. Eu, como figura pública, eu uso o máximo da minha visibilidade para falar da causa, e eu acredito também que uma coisa, já que a gente está falando do agravar que a gente teve com a pandemia, eu acredito que tenhamos que ser estratégicos. O Brasil, ele tem uma febre que é o Instagram. O Instagram, ele é muito potente hoje em dia, e hoje em dia ele está valorizando muito a questão de vídeos curtos. Então, talvez devêssemos também apostar em fazer vídeos curtos de conscientização, de histórias até mesmo, para as pessoas se ambientarem com o tema, mas vídeos curtos e estratégicos que possamos fazer links no Instagram, na internet do Brasil, porque eu acredito que vai ter um alcance muito grande, uma mensagem rápida e que vai ser efetiva para a disseminação desse conhecimento e, com isso, o fim do preconceito, o fim do estigma e, assim, mais pessoas buscando tratamento, mais pessoas sendo inseridas na sociedade. Eu reforço aqui o meu compromisso na luta contra a hanseníase, para o Morhan, para o grupo Sasakawa, para todos os países que lutam contra a hanseníase, contem comigo. Eu sou uma embaixadora da luta contra a hanseníase e eu não vou terminar, não vou parar até que a gente consiga erradicar a hanseníase. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Júlia Gama. É muito bom, eu repito, trabalhar com você é sempre muito, muito poderoso, muito potente. E aí eu gostaria já de inserir no nosso debate a Miss Brasil Mundo, Caroline Teixeira.
Hello, world. I am Caroline Teixeira, Miss World Brazil 2021, and an ambassador for the fight against Hansen's disease in my country. Quero cumprimentar o senhor embaixador da boa vontade da Organização Mundial da Saúde para a Eliminação da Hanseníase, o Sasakawa, o coordenador nacional do Morhan, Arthur Custódio, e a Miss Brasil Universo e embaixadora internacional da luta contra a Hanseníase, a Júlia Gama. É um grande prazer estar aqui participando do bate-papo com vocês, que são verdadeiros doutores e guerreiros na luta contra a Hanseníase, e que incansavelmente, através de todos esses anos, vem propagando e despertando na sociedade o compromisso e essa responsabilidade de defender a causa. Eu tenho muito a aprender com vocês, e porque há um pouco mais de um mês eu fui eleita a 61ª Miss Brasil Mundo, e naquela noite eu também me tornei a embaixadora dessa causa tão nobre, que não é uma luta apenas contra uma doença, mas principalmente contra o preconceito, e todo esse preconceito arraigado a ela. Hoje eu me encontro no Amazonas, um dos 27 estados brasileiros, que se encontra também boa parte da floresta amazônica, que é o pulmão do mundo, mas infelizmente aqui no Amazonas é também um dos líderes de incidência da Hanseníase no Brasil. Eu estou aqui para o lançamento da campanha mundial, não se esqueçam da Hanseníase, é tão necessária nos tempos complexos e de pandemia que estamos vivendo. Ontem eu participei, juntamente com o Morhan, de vários eventos muito importantes com visibilidade de mídia, e também firmamos esse compromisso com as autoridades ligadas à saúde, de assistência social do estado do Amazonas, e também do nosso país, é o nosso objetivo. E tomando em conta esse universo que eu sigo explorando e conhecendo um pouco mais todos os dias, hoje eu visitarei 2 antigas colônias para entender melhor essa triste história e conversar com todas essas pessoas que até hoje residem, para poder realmente entender a realidade delas e levar isso para o mundo. Esse é o projeto, como a Júlia também abraçou em 2014 e até hoje abraça. Eu levarei para o Miss Mundo, e eu vou concorrer o Miss Mundo em dezembro, em Porto Rico, e irei como embaixadora na luta. E falarei também hoje com as universidades brasileiras, através do Reúna Hans, uma rede de academias para enfrentamento da Hanseníase, e que o Morhan, ele participa, e que o Morhan participa, e eu também vou visitar imigrantes que assistidos pelo estado do Amazonas, que pela realidade social, eles também estão expostos à doença. E depois eu vou seguir para o interior do estado para conhecer a situação dos ribeirinhos, onde a incidência da Hanseníase é muito maior, e poder dar atenção a essas pessoas, levar a informação e o conhecimento, como a Júlia disse, é a minha maior missão, e poder influenciar as pessoas de uma maneira positiva, ser uma ponte entre as vítimas de Hanseníase e as pessoas em geral, através das mídias sociais, é uma grande responsabilidade e algo desafiador, mas é realmente a minha missão, é o que eu quero fazer. E eu também gostaria de mencionar que estamos fazendo uma campanha de arrecadação de um dinheiro para comprar e doar para o Hospital Santa Marcelina de Porto Velho, em Rondônia, de um aparelho eletroneumiógrafo, podendo fazer a diferença não somente em Rondônia, no estado de Rondônia, mas também no interior de Amazonas, Acre, Mato Grosso e outros lugares que o hospital atende. E mais do que nunca, a Hanseníase e aqueles que são e foram vítimas dela, eles precisam ser lembrados e tratados com respeito e todas essas medidas que eles merecem. E minha principal ação como Miss Brasil Mundo, embaixadora do combate à Hanseníase no Brasil, será de utilizar toda essa visibilidade do título para despertar e divulgar ao máximo para a maior quantidade de pessoas que eu conseguir, que a Hanseníase, ela sim tem cura e que podemos juntos vencê-la. E se depender de mim, eu vou me esforçar muito, eu levarei essa mensagem com muita dedicação, muito amor por onde eu passar, e ficamos nessa esperança de que um dia essa enfermidade seja totalmente erradicada. Obrigada.
Obrigado, Caroline Teixeira. Esses dias têm sido muito intensos mesmo, muito trabalho aqui no Amazonas. e o envolvimento pela primeira vez de um Estado aderindo já à luta, né, da campanha Não Esqueça da Hanseníase. Em Rondônia vai ser o segundo, né? E a gente vai assinar lá o compromisso. Eu gostaria de chamar já para fazer uso da palavra o meu amigo, meu irmão, o embaixador da boa vontade da OMS para a eliminação da Hanseníase, o rei Sasakawa.
Bom dia. アルトゥルさん、素晴らしい会を計画してくださって、ありがとうございます。また、ジュリアさん、カロリーナさん、厳しいコンテストの中を勝ち抜いて、ミス・ユニバースとミス・ワールドになられたことをまず心からお祝い申し上げます。あなた方お二人は単に美しいというだけではなく、今のお話を伺っていると本当に心も美しい方であるということがよく分かりましたし、またどのようにしてこのハンセン病をなくすか、またこの病気から回復した人たちをどのように激励するかということについても、すでに深い知識を持っていらっしゃるのに、私は大変驚くと同時に大変嬉しく思いました。ブラジルではアルトゥールさんの活躍で、かつては有名な歌手の方だとか女優さんもこのハンセン病の戦いに参加をしてくださったことがございますし、今回このように美しい2人の方がハンセン病の戦い、そして人権問題に関わってくださるというのは大変社会的に影響力のあるお二人でございますので、素晴らしい我々は仲間を得たと心から感謝しております。このコロナの厳しいパンデミックの中でいかにしてこのハンセン病に対する活動をするかということについて、もうすでにお二人の方が答えを出してくださったということに私は大変驚いております。すでにお話がありましたように、私たちは新しいツールといいますか道具を手に入れております。それは日本ではスマートフォンと言っておりますが、ブラジルで何て言うんでしょうかね、同じでしょうかね。そういうものを通じて、いわゆる IT をうまく活用をして、情報を徹底的に発信をしていくということがコロナの中でもできるわけでございますので、これを積極的に活用して、お二方のご協力も得ながら、またこの回復者の皆様方も遠慮なくこの自分たちの抱えている問題を、そして、社会の誤った考え方、いわゆるハンセン病に対する誤った考えを正すために、皆さんがやはりこの IT を使って、スマートフォンを使ってのTwitter ですとか、Facebook ですとか、いろいろございます。これでみんな世界中の関係者が発信をしていけばですね、大変大きな情報量が発信できるわけでございますので、 私たちのこれからの戦いは、そういうものを上手に活用していくことによって、一人一人が何百人、何千人、何十万人という人たちに正しい情報を届けることができるわけでございます。3年前にブラジルを訪問しましたときに、大統領とお目にかかりました。その場で、このインターネット、フェイスブックでしたかね、で、お話をされたら、1日で70万人以上の方々がアクセスをしてくださいました。従いまして、お二方の活動はもとより、今日のこのウェビナーを見ている方々、そして私たち自身も、やはり正しい情報の発信をさらに活発にするということが、このコロナの中での私たちにとっては最大の武器であると思っております。私はこの可能な限りテレビやテレビのない地域もあります。そういうところではラジオに出演することによって説明をしてまいりましたけども、もっと直接的に多くの人にリーチ届けられるのはこの新しいスマートフォンを活用した方法だということを改めて今お二人のお話を聞いて、気がついたところでございます。僕はそういう意味でジュリアさんとカロリーナさんから今新しい活動の方法を教えられたということで心から御礼申し上げます。そしていずれ近いうちにあなた方と共にブラジルの中で活動できることを心から期待をいたしております。本当にありがとう。Obrigado.
Agradeço meu irmão, meu amigo Sasakawa, por todo o seu empenho, por toda a sua luta, pelas respostas esclarecedoras e agradeço a Caroline Teixeira, a nossa Miss Brasil, agradeço Júlia Gama, nossa Miss Brasil, é muito bom, de novo, repito, estar com vocês e já convido o professor Takahiro para assumir a discussão aqui das perguntas.
Thank you, Arthur. Thank you, Miss Julia, Miss Carolina, and Mr. Sasakawa. Thank you very much. Let's move on the Q&A session. I want to invite Professor Takahiro Nandi, Executive Director of Sasakawa Health Foundation, to facilitate this session.
Thank you very much, Shikako. Firstly, I appreciate you sending so many questions in advance. However, due to our time constraint, we have decided to identify a few questions. So I hope you would kindly understand. But like we have done the last time, the Goodwill Ambassador will try to answer your questions separately after the webinar. So, okay, I want to invite the first person, Mr. Aldi from Permata, Indonesia. Mr. Aldi, are you there?
Yes, I'm ready.
So please go ahead.
Yes, thank you very much for their giving to me, the Honorable Mr. Yohei Sasakawa and Mr. Taka. I have question for Mr. Yohei. What role does the CRPD play for the people affected leprosy? Thank you very much.
権利条約について。
Yes, Mr. Sasakawa, please.
アルディさん、お元気そうですね。
Que bom ver que você parece estar bem, Sr. Aldi.
さっきの私のビデオをご覧になりましたか？ちゃんとインドネシアのシャツを着て、なんていうんだったっけね、あれ。インドネシアのマティク着て、ご質問にありましたようにね、障害者の権利条約の中には当然のことをハンセン病の患者や回復者も入ってますし、それ以外のさまざまな障害を持った人たちもいらっしゃいます。で、これらの取り組みについては2つの方法があります。1つは当然のことながら政府がこれを実行しなければいけないことになっております。しかし、その取り組みは国によって相当な違いがあるのは現実でございます。また、私どもが頑張って、国連でハンセン病の患者回復者、そしてその家族に対する差別や偏見は撤廃しなきゃいけないという P&G のついた結論が出たこともご承知の通りだと思います。しかしながら私たちは国からの対策を待っていてはいけません。私はこの障害者権利条約、あるいはハンセン病に対する差別撤廃の決議案、これを私たちの戦う道具として、私たち自身がこれを社会に発信をしていく努力が大変重要だと思っております。私はこれから回復者の皆さんの組織の強化のために、協力したいと願っております。これからのハンセン病の戦いは皆様方、回復者の皆さんが中心にならなければ、皆さん方が主役です。そして先ほども話したように、SNS という素晴らしい道具を私たちは今持っているわけですから、皆様方一人一人が問題のあることをどんどん発信をしていただくということが大変重要な活動になってきたと私は思っております。私は今世界の大企業500社の CEO に参加していただいて、アフターコロナの時代はあらゆる障害者が大企業の中できちっと働ける環境を整備しようということで、マイクロソフトですとかアマゾンですとかヨーロッパでは大きなユニリバーですとか大きな大会社の皆様方 CEO にこのアフターコロナは多様性の時代である。いろいろな障害者の方々は働く情熱もあります。意欲もあります。ないのは働くチャンスなんです。それを作ってもらいたい。世界には現在15億人の障害者がいるんです。この人たちに職を与えること、またこの人たちが障害者が消費するものというのはまた膨大な量があるわけでございますから、そういう意味で 15億人の人をどうやって活用するかということが、アフターコロナの私は多様性のある新しい社会を作る方法だと思っております。アルディさん、インドネシアはたくさんの島からなった国ですから、なかなかアクセスをするのが難しいと思いますが、この SNS の時代でございます。私たちはあなたの組織をさらに強化したい。そして社会の中で存在感のある組織にしたいと思っておりますので、これから積極的に協力をしてまいりますから、大きな夢を描いて、あなたは指導者として一つインドネシアのハンセン病の患者回復者のために戦う先頭に立ってください。
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Arti, and thank you very much, Mr. Sasakawa. I fully agree with what Mr. Sasakawa said. The persons affected by leprosy or Hansen disease should play central roles to fight against the disease, and our foundation is happy to continuously support their activities. So, all right, I want to invite the next person, Miss Florence from NLR, Netherlands. Miss Florence, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Yes,
I appreciate this opportunity to. Hello, Mr. Sasakawa.
Hello.
Nice to see you on video, and I appreciate the opportunity to ask a question to you. And this question comes from my interaction with one of our colleagues in Nepal, a formerly affected person of leprosy. And she said that the disease she was cured of, but the stigma and discrimination lived with her until now. My question to you is, leprosy elimination really cannot be achieved without tackling its associated stigma and discrimination. As a Goodwill Ambassador of WHO, how do you think WHO will address this? Thank you so much.
大変いい質問をいただきましてありがとうございます。
Muito obrigada pela pergunta, que foi muito boa.
確かに、私どもは病気を治すことに一生懸命 WHO としては努力をしてまいりました。しかしながら私は世界中に薬を5年間無料で配布し、ハンセン病の病気が治った方々を各国で見て驚きました。それは病気が治っているにもかかわらず、社会の側からの偏見や差別は全くなくなっていないことに、その時気がついたんです。その時には、その時代には、WHO は確かに病気を治すことに専念しておりました。従いまして私は先ほどのビデオを見ていただいた通り、2003年に国連人権理事会ジュネーブを訪問したときに、26人の人権の専門家がいまだ一度もハンセン病レプロシーがこんなに大きな世界的な人権問題だということは全く知らなかったし、一度も話題になったこともないということを言われて、大変驚いたことを今も覚えております。私はそれから7年の戦いを終えて、先ほどのビデオにありましたように2010年に国連でハンセン病の患者、回復者、その家族に対する差別撤廃の決議案を通すことが できました。従いまして、現在 WHO も病気だけの問題ではなくて、私が常々言っているハンセン病の制圧活動はモーターサイクル、オートバイだ。前の車は病気を治すこと。後ろの車は、車輪は偏見や差別をなくすこと。このモーターサイクルの両輪がうまく動かないと、この病気を制圧することはできないということを申し上げておりますので、結論を申せば、WHO もこのモーターサイクル、私が言ったモーターサイクルに従って、この病気を治すとともに差別の撤廃に、大変今力を入れて活動をしているところでございます。フローレンスさん、いい質問いただきありがとうございました。これからも一緒に戦いを進めていきましょう。
Thank you very much, Ms. Florence and Mr. Sasakawa. For your clarification, Mr. Sasakawa is one of the first persons who convinced WHO to integrate human rights issues in leprosy services. So he is a quite strong advocate toward WHO. So, okay, I think time is running out. So unfortunately, we have to close the session here. So thank you very much again for sending the many questions. We will try to answer to your questions separately after the webinar. So I want to turn over to Chikako.
Thank you very much. In the next session, Professor Taka will give the presentation on how to participate in the Don't Forget Hansen Disease Leprosy campaign. Professor Taka, please.
So thank you, Chikako, again. Since time is running out, I'll try to be very brief about my presentation. So first, let me briefly explain about our Don't Forget Leprosy Hansen Disease campaign. From August 2021 to May 2022, which is until the next World Health Assembly, our message, reminding the world that leprosy should not be forgotten amid the coronavirus pandemic. Our tactics, maximizing the opportunity of 20th anniversary for Mr. Sasakawa to be appointed as WHO Goodwill Ambassador. Who to join? Anyone who agrees on the theme, under the same logo, or even under the same song we are going to listen after this presentation. Our targets, we target on all the stakeholders. You know, when we say, don't forget leprosy or Hansen disease, what shouldn't we forget about? It could be leprosy as a disease. General public should not forget about leprosy and its associated problems. Policymakers too. Definitely, we should not forget about the persons affected by leprosy and their family members, especially who are suffering under the pandemic. Medical professionals and community health workers working very hard on the ground level. We should not also forget about their efforts. So in order to ensure your broader participation to our campaign, we want to leave you a space to flexibly consider what and who should be targeted in your campaign. So ongoing and planned activities. We have already started media activities by Mr. Sasakawa as WHO Goodwill Ambassador. Webinar and video series. This is the second one. We are going to organize similar activities in November, January, March, and May. Global Appeal and its side events. We are going to organize a Global Appeal ceremony on January 30 online, and we expect that our guest speakers will be representative of the persons affected, United Nations Secretary General, still under the negotiation, ministers from endemic countries. We're also planning to organize 3 webinars in January as a side events, focusing on 3 actors: youth, community health workers, and philanthropic foundations. So how you can participate in our campaign? This is a major topic of my presentation today. We are calling for your participation to deliver the message of "Don't forget leprosy or Hansen disease" toward World Leprosy or Hansen Disease Day 2022. We have already done joint activities in the past 2 years. In 2020, together with 17 people's organizations from 16 countries, it was right after Global Forum in 2019, we organized the joint campaign. In 2021, the beginning of this year, we organized the special webinar named Zero Leprosy for Whom, and 22 people's organizations from 18 countries participated. So this year, the next World Leprosy or Hansen Disease Day, we are thinking to launch a new small grant scheme up to $10,000. Eligibilities: all those who agree with the campaign theme, meaning that not only the people's organizations, but also any other organizations like NGOs, youth group, research institute, universities, all of them are eligible to apply. Areas to be supported: 1, awareness raising activities, webinar, seminar, advocacy meet, rally, and so on. 2, the media activities. We encourage you to deliver messages through TV, radio, and newspapers. 3, surveys and studies of the situation surrounding the persons affected by leprosy and Hansen disease. Especially, we encourage you to collect evidence as to what is actually happening on the ground level. Because unfortunately, many of us still don't know the situation correctly. We can use evidence not only for our advocacy purposes, but also for considering our future activities to effectively support those who are suffering under the pandemic. And second one is SNS campaign, as Mr. Sasakawa has emphasized today. Like, we are encouraging you to post short video messages. So about these 2 activities, we are going to post the details on our website very soon. So I'm very much looking forward to your participation to our campaign. So thank you very much. And by the way, my background picture, this picture was taken in Brazil, the state of Pela, 2 years ago. This is very beautiful pictures, and this is one of my favorite. And I hope that in the near future, I'm able to go back to the Brazil, not only Brazil, but also your countries, together with Mr. Sasakawa. So thank you very much. So I want to turn over to Chicago.
Thank you very much, Professor Taka. So let's move on to the final session. Mr. Faustino Morhan will introduce us of the campaign song, "Don't Forget Hansen Disease."
We at Morhan, Movimento for the Reintegration of People Affected by Hansen's Disease, would like to add sunshine to the campaign. Don't forget Hansen disease. We would need to have a musical identity because past experiences make us believe that it's easier to process information through music and have the listener memorize it. The theme song of this campaign has the same name, Don't Forget Hansen Disease, and is written and sung by Julie Oliver, a music student from the city of Crato, Ceará, and now a Morhan volunteer. She has partnered with another volunteer, singer Karina Ferreira, from the city of Juazeiro do Norte, with guidance on pathology and nomenclatures by Faustino Pinto. We have a Portuguese version and also an English version with adjustment and translation into English by our friends and volunteer Carlos Abelheira. The samba bossa nova music speaks of prejudice, discrimination, stigma, sins and symptoms and conveys this powerful message. Don't forget Hansen disease. We will have 3 contents: an audio MP3 file and 2 video clips for the Portuguese and English versions. We will write a letter and send it to all centers and partners so that they can get in touch with the radio and television stations in their cities and post to their social media profiles such as Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, WhatsApp. We would like to take the opportunity and ask the Sasakawa Health Foundation to kindly do the same. And now for the video clip with Julia Oliver and Karina Ferreira.
Thank you very much. It's very beautiful music. I hope that we will share this song in many places in the world. So this is the end of the webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today. Our next webinar will be held at the end of November, and we will invite all of you. Thank you very much, and have a nice day.